One of the biggest myths when it comes to IBS is that there is one ideal diet that can reduce or resolve symptoms for pretty much anyone who struggles with irritable bowel syndrome. You've likely seen all kinds of recommendations. Eat a high fiber diet, eat a low fiber diet, avoid dairy, avoid wheat and gluten, avoid eggs, avoid raw vegetables, avoid beans and fruit, and avoid all foods high in FODMAPs. Oh, and alcohol, and avoid coffee. Does this sound familiar? Now, the reason for so much of this conflicting and, let's face it, confusing advice is that different people with IBS respond differently to different foods. The fact is that there's no universal trigger or danger foods, so unfortunately there's no universal IBS diet. Now, the low FODMAP diet probably comes closest, and there is some good evidence showing that it can help to reduce IBS symptoms, but it's also very restrictive and it's not designed to be followed long term. Now, interestingly, research suggests that only about 1 in 4 people with IBS actually experience symptoms that are caused or made worse by things in their diet. What's more common are IBS flare-ups or feeling unwell caused by thinking about foods as being dangerous or harmful. Because all of that worry and all of that anxiety and that fear have a direct influence on your digestive system. And if all of this is new to you, then I recommend watching this video on your screen, which is the 7 thinking styles that flare up your IBS symptoms. Because in the words of Julia Child, an unhappy or suspicious stomach, constricted and uneasy with all of that worry, just cannot digest your food properly. Now, unfortunately, if you have IBS and you start to become fearful of food, you are at risk of developing something called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is where avoiding foods leads to problems such as weight loss, malnutrition, significant social restrictions, and loss in the joy and the pleasure of eating. In fact, I frequently work with clients who struggle with many and sometimes all of these issues. But why do you become so afraid of eating and end up avoiding so many different types of foods? Well, it's pretty simple. You don't want to risk having a flare-up and then have to face the consequences of that. So it's easier and it feels safer to just avoid meals, especially if you have somewhere to go afterwards. Now, if all of this sounds familiar, then you'll find a link to the Fear of Food questionnaire just down in the description so you can see where you sit on the scale. And then you can let me know down in the comments what your results are. And look, being afraid of food when you have IBS is not being picky. When I talk to my clients, they genuinely wish they could eat certain foods and they miss them. But they're just so afraid of triggering those painful and debilitating symptoms that it just feels as though their only option is to avoid them completely. But sooner or later, avoiding foods becomes problematic for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. So how do you start to reintroduce foods when you feel so much anxiety and worry, and even a small amount of that food might make you feel super anxious? Well, one of the main things to focus on is that if it was the food triggering your IBS symptoms, then 100% of the time you would have a flare-up. But from personal experience and from working with clients for over 5 years now with IBS, the majority of the time, nothing happens. So what we need to do is come back to this point that it's unlikely to be the food and more likely to be the anxiety of expecting something awful to happen that's actually creating your GI symptoms. Now, the other key point to be aware of is that over time, you've likely trained your mind to be one very powerful spotlight of attention on your stomach and on your abdominal region. You have become very good at noticing even the tiniest sensations inside of your digestive system. This is both hypervigilance and visceral hypersensitivity. So when you notice a small gurgle or a movement, your mind immediately sounds the alarm. And when you focus in on this area, you start to notice those sensations more and more and more, and you become more worried. And those sensations become more and more uncomfortable. So the answer to moving away from being anxious around food is in fact twofold. Firstly, become aware of where your attention goes when you're eating. Do you focus your attention like a spotlight in on your digestive system? because the more you can refocus and shift your attention elsewhere, you'll find that sensations become less and less bothersome. Now, a great way to shift your focus away from your stomach and your abdominal area is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. This exercise widens your attention to the environment around you instead of focusing in on your body and in your stomach area. It also keeps you present in this current moment. And so this technique involves looking around you and out loud saying 5 things that you can see. And then out loud, what are 4 things that you can feel? Then 3 things that you can hear, followed by 2 things that you can smell. And finally, what's 1 thing that you can taste? It might even be the coffee or the tea or the toothpaste when you brush your teeth in the morning. And then the second part of navigating away from food anxiety is to become aware of what that chatty part of your mind is saying about the food you're eating. What are those what-if thoughts? What are you predicting is going to happen? What are you telling yourself about the food or that meal that is creating that anxiety and that worry inside of you? For example, I shouldn't be eating this, or I'm going to pay for this later. This is what I call thought work. And in the next video, I'll be sharing a useful strategy on how to lessen the intensity of these thoughts so that you can start to feel calmer around meal times and reintroduce foods back into your diet. So head on over to that next video. Thank you as always for watching and joining me here at the Calm and Happy Gut.